The train pulled in like a long sigh that had been held across 3 counties, breathing out steam and rust as it slowed to a halt under a sun that had already begun to lean westward. The wheels shrieked in protest against old rails, and dust curled up from the dry earth like ghosts, unsure of where to go next. Out stepped a woman, not hurried, not hesitant, just steady. She wore blue, not the kind of blue that sang. No, hers was the sort that remembered, a faded shade that might have once been called sky or slate, now somewhere in between. Her boots scuffed, her hat stitched by hand, and in her gloved hand, a single folded letter unfolded so often it was soft as cloth. The ink on its creases nearly gone. No one was there to greet her. No name was called, no arms opened wide, just silence. The kind of silence that always lives around small, half-forgotten towns where things arrive but never leave whole. She stepped onto the platform and sat down on a wooden crate beside her lone trunk. Dust plumed gently as she settled, her skirts sighing around her knees. The station behind her had peeling paint. The sign above read Bellstone. That was it. Not welcome to Bellstone, just Bellstone. As if the town itself wasn't quite sure if it wanted visitors. The woman waited. A child passed by first. Sticky hands, berry-stained chin, shoelaces dragging. He slowed, curious. She smiled. He didn't smile back, but he offered her a canteen without a word. She took it, sipped once, thanked him. He nodded and vanished behind the general store. By noon, the street held more shadows than horses. The heat had settled into every crevice of the buildings. The townsfolk, those who came and went along the edge of her vision, pretended not to look. But they were looking. There was always talk when someone like her arrived. A woman traveling alone. A trunk that looked too heavy for her to carry. No chaperone, no family, no husband waiting. Just the crate, the trunk, and that letter, held like a compass in her lap. Somewhere behind her eyes, stories played out, you could tell. Her lips didn't move, but every so often, her lashes blinked slow, like she was turning pages in her mind. Maybe she imagined what he'd look like, the man who sent the letter. Maybe she pictured their little home, the way the porch would creak, how her name would sound, spoken with love. Maybe, just maybe, she was wondering if she'd made a mistake. By the second evening, the station master asked, "You sure he's coming?" She only said, "That's what he wrote." On the 3rd day, the widow from the edge of town came walking with 2 slices of bread wrapped in a cloth. She said nothing at first, just handed over the bundle and sat beside the woman on the crate. The widow smelled of lavender soap and old grief. They didn't speak, but somehow, it felt like they'd said a great deal. The widow finally broke the silence. Some men write things they never meant to live. The woman didn't cry, didn't even flinch. She just folded the breadcloth neatly, after eating, and tucked it into her bag like it was made of gold thread. By the 5th day, whispers ran thicker than river mud. He'd left town. He never meant to marry. He found gold in Arizona and forgot her name. He was married. Already he never existed at all. No one really knew. No one really asked her. Still she sat. Every morning she brushed off the dust from her skirt, smoothed her bodice, and sat on the crate like it was a pew and she was waiting for church to start. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have guessed, was that the woman had learned long ago how to survive long silences. She knew how to wait, not like someone who was desperate, but like someone who had nowhere else to rush to. The notebook came out by day 6. It was soft leather, edges curled from use. She wrote with a pencil shaved by pocket knife. Nobody knew what she wrote. Poems? Maybe. Prayers? Maybe. She was writing the name of every person who walked by without looking her in the eye. Maybe she was writing letters she'd never send. Then came a small kindness. One afternoon, the sky yawned open, not with rain, but with wind, the kind that picks up dust and old regrets. It tugged at her skirt and tousled her hair loose from its braid. A teenager, barely more than a boy, passed by, dropped a clean kerchief beside her boot, didn't say a word, just nodded, then disappeared down the alley. She smiled for the first time in days. It wasn't a smile like someone who was saved. It was the kind you give when you realize you're stronger than the place that tried to shame you. Somewhere in her silence, she became a mirror for the town. The longer she stayed, the more they had to reckon with how they'd ignored her. No one knew her name, but everyone knew the crate. By day 10, the crate had a cushion on it. Someone had left it overnight. Homemade, mismatched fabric patches stitched with care. There was no note, just comfort. It made her sit a little taller. The sun had begun its descent behind the low hills, dipping the town in honeyed light. The wind slowed to a whisper, brushing strands of her hair across her cheek. She tucked them behind her ear, without looking up. She'd stopped looking toward the tracks. Her shoulders weren't slumped anymore. She wasn't waiting. She was holding space out for herself, for something new, and somewhere, not far from the edge of town, a horse's hooves padded soft across prairie soil, and a man, the quiet kind, rode slow back as he knew. Some heart sought to be approached with gentleness, not grand entrance, but she didn't know that yet. Not today. Today, she just sat on a crate, not waiting anymore, but becoming. He arrived away, early snow comesquiet and late after. Most have stopped expecting it. A figure atop a bay horse, slow moving like he didn't mind the waiting, like life itself could take its time around him. The cowboy wasn't known for noise. Folks said he spoke only when the silence had said its part first. He wasn't from Not exactly, but he'd been in Bellstone long enough for people to stop asking questions. He worked odd jobs, fences, barns, broken wagons, cracked hinges. He lived out on the edge, where the prairie met the whispering pines. He had a scar on one knuckle, a hat that had been shaped by weather not fashion, and a look in his eyes like he'd seen things no man should, and remembered every one of them. The first time he saw her was not when she first arrived. It was several days later, when he came into town for nails and oats. She was sweeping the porch of the widow's shop, the broom in her hands. Moved like it was part of her steady, rhythmic, not hurried. She didn't look up when he passed, but he did, just once, then kept walking. But he remembered, in town, folks had stopped whispering about her, but they still watched. The crate was still there beside the station wall, but it no longer looked like something she sat on out of desperation. Now it looked like hers, like a place claimed every now and then. The cowboy would pass by, never too close, never speaking, but he always saw her sweeping, sitting, reading, helping, living like the roots of a tree, slowly growing deeper. He noticed the small ways she moved, how she tied her braid twice if the wind was strong, how she placed stones in her apron when walking to keep it from flying, how she never met a gaze unless it was offered gently. One morning, a child tripped outside the blacksmith's, blood and sobs painting the air. The townsfolk startled, some moved toward, others turned away. But she was already kneeling, calm as dusk, tore a piece from her hem, wrapped the boy's knee, whispered something only he heard. He stopped crying before his mother even arrived. The cowboy saw that, didn't say anything, just watched. He returned the next day with something he hadn't bought, a saddle blanket, thick, soft, worn just right. The clouds had been threatening rain since morning, and by the time he reached the station, she was already there sitting on her crate, skirt damp at the hem. He dismounted slowly, walked toward her, without a word, laid the blanket on the crate beside her. No ceremony, no flourish, just one line: dry ground helps the bones. Then he left. Didn't wait for thanks. Didn't look back. She watched him walk away. Then, slowly, she folded the blanket over once. Maureen sat upon it like it was the throne of some small, private kingdom. The next week, they passed each other 3 times. Each time, there was only a nod, but the nods got slower, more certain, more known. the widow noticed. She said it one evening while they shelled beans by the window. Some men look straight through a woman, some men look at her, but the rare ones, they see her dot and don't flinch. The woman didn't respond, but her hands moved slower through the beans, and when she finally spoke, she said only, "He's different." One afternoon, the general store needed help organizing ledgers. The widow sent her. The cowboy was already there, mending the hinge on the back door. They shared the same room for an hour, and said nothing. But something passed between them, not like lightning, more like the hum of bees, near wild sage present, gentle, alive. Later, the storekeeper said, "Those two are like two old trees grown up beside one another, not knowing how close their roots have already tangled." No one laughed, because everyone knew he was right. There was no flirtation, no blushing, no sudden sparks, only shared space and the deepening peace of being near. Someone who did not expect you to be louder than your quiet. He started coming to town, more often, once for nails, then for flour, then for nothing in particular. She noticed, but said nothing. That was their rhythm. Things spoken without words. One night, someone new came into Bellstone, a rider, wild-eyed and dust-covered. He stank of sweat and whiskey and looked too long at the women passing by. He asked for her by the station, asked what happened to the girl who came off the train, the male bride. He grinned like he knew a secret, said he'd known the man who sent for her, said maybe he'd like a turn. And before anyone could move, the cowboy stepped between. He didn't touch the man, didn't shout, didn't threaten. He just stood, like a mountain stands, and said, "She's not yours to talk about." And the rider, sensing something deeper than mere warning, left before sunset. She never said thank you, but that night, a small tin of tea appeared beside his saddle the next morning, wrapped in cloth with wildflower petals, tucked beneath the twine. He never asked how she knew his favorite. He just drank it every evening after. The days lengthened. The sky turned gold. Earlier, and when she passed the crate now, she didn't sit. She touched it once, gently, like a gravestone marking a version of herself she'd buried. He noticed, and she noticed that he noticed. Spring slipped in without asking. There were no trumpets, no parades, only the kind of quiet blooming you don't notice until one morning. The earth smells like green again, and the wind no longer bites. The station no longer defined her. She passed by it like someone remembering a song they no longer needed to sing. The crate still stood there, a little worn, a little sun-bleached, but it belonged to time now, not to her. She was different. Not by some grand event, but by 1,000 small kindnesses that built a bridge between what she'd survived and who she was now becoming. She worked at the general store now, kept ledgers, counted coins, sometimes swept when the breeze brought dust through the cracks. People spoke to her, not with pity anymore, but with the steady tone you use with someone who's earned your respect by simply staying. And he, the cowboy, came more often, sometimes with purpose, sometimes not. No one asked anymore. They just knew. He brought her little things, not flowers, not yet, but things he'd noticed she liked without her ever saying. A spool of deep red thread that matched the trim on her dress, a bundle of cinnamon sticks from the traveling wagon, a piece of river glass, smooth and sea green, shaped like a tear that time had forgiven. He didn't hand them to her. He left them near by her books, on her workbench, on the porch rail, as if to say, "I see you, I remember. You don't owe me your thanks." One evening, just as the sun brushed the town in gold and lavender, she found something else, a small tin box, polished clean, inside her favorite tea, imported, fragile, expensive. She hadn't spoken its name in months. She wasn't even sure he'd heard her say it. She turned and found him standing not far, hands in his pockets, eyes down. She didn't speak, but she held the tin close to her chest and nodded. once, and he nodded back, as if to say, "You're not forgotten." One day they shared a meal. It wasn't planned. She had cooked extra. He had passed by, and there was a bench with enough space for two. They ate in silence at first. The wind spoke more than they did, pushing wildflowers back and forth, whispering across the tall grass like it was translating old prayers. Then he asked, "Do you miss where you came from?" She chewed slowly, swallowed, and replied, "No, not really." A pause. "Then do you?" He thought a long while, then said, "Don't know that I ever came from anywhere." And just like that, they were two people, not just shaped by absence, but meeting one another somewhere in the middle of becoming whole. Over the next weeks, they began walking more often, not together, not always, but in the same places, at the same times, and each time, their shadows crept closer. Their silences grew warmer, and the space between them felt less like distance and more like invitation. Then a crack in the quiet. A test. A man arrived, not the one who had sent the letter, but someone who'd known him, rough around the edges. Eyes that laughed too cruelly, words soaked in whiskey. He saw her by the store, leaned too close, spat out memories not his to share. She was promised, he sneered. She was thrown away, said it like it was a joke, and then the cowboy appeared. No fists, no raised voice, just his presence, like a wall built of calm, strong wood and unspoken loyalty. He didn't push the man, didn't glare, just looked at him, steady, and said, "Leave," and the man did. Because there's a kind of silence in some men that says everything without a word. Later that evening, she found a small bouquet by the station crate, dusty wildflowers, no ribbon, no note, but she knew. She picked them up gently, pressed them to her face, and for the first time since stepping off that train, she allowed herself to cry. Not from sorrow, but from the unfamiliar weight of finally being seen. That night, the town held its spring gathering, a soft music kind of night, with fireflies and pie and fiddles playing beneath lanterns hung across porches. She wore the red-threaded dress. He stood not far. They didn't dance, but they stood close enough for the others to notice that love, the real kind, often blooms not from sparks, but from soil and rain and time. Someone whispered, "Are they courting?" And the widow smiled into her teacup and said, "No, they're remembering each other, from a place they've never been." That takes longer than courting. As the night deepened, he walked her home. Still no hand held, still no confession. But as they paused at her step, she turned and asked, "Did you ever think of leaving?" He looked at the stars for a long while, then answered, "Once. But then I realized, some things are worth staying for, even if they never speak your name." She nodded, slow and warm, and then she did something she'd never done before, reached for his hand, just for a second. Just enough to say, "I see you too." Summer arrived slow, the kind that doesn't announce itself, but settles into the soil and warms it until flowers wake without realizing they slept. The crate still sat by the station, though the woman no longer did. It had become something else now, a symbol, a memory, a mark in the dust where something once began, or ended, depending on how you looked at it. She had grown into the town like wild roots beneath the planks. The widow called her by a name that sounded like kindness. The storekeeper trusted her with the till. The children didn't remember a time when she wasn't there, and the cowboy, he still rode quiet. But now his silence had a rhythm that matched hers. It was not emptiness. It was knowing. They still hadn't spoken words like love or forever. They didn't need to. They spoke in moments. He brought her pears in early harvest. She mended the loose button on his coat without asking. Somewhere, between all those ordinary days, something extraordinary had taken root. But peace, like everything, gets tested. It came in the form of a letter, brown-edged, folded twice. The station master brought it himself, his face uneasy. The first man, the one who wrote that letter long ago, and never came, and never said sorry, was returning. Not for her, not even for apology, but to collect what he'd left behind. A horse, some land, maybe even just to be seen again as a man who hadn't run. The town stirred. They whispered behind shelves, behind fences, behind their eyes. Would she run? Would she hide? Would she finally break? But she did none of those. She ironed her best dress, the one with the red thread he hadn't given her. She walked to the crate before dawn, not to sit, but to stand, and wait. Not for a man, not for closure, but to look her ghost in the eye. He came off the train like he'd never been afraid. Clean coat, greased hair, smile sharpened too wide. He looked her up and down, laughed once, low. Well, I'll be still waiting. And she, with a calm that echoed through every sunburned board of that platform, shook her head. No, I was just remembering how far I've come. He blinked. That smile faltered. And then he saw the cowboy. He stood not far, quiet as always. But now his presence was a wall no storm could breach. The first man looked from her to him, back again, shrugged like none of it mattered. Guess I did you a favor, he muttered, and turned toward the stables. She didn't watch him go. She had already let him go years ago on the 10th day in silence, with no witnesses. This wasn't about him. It never was. The cowboy walked toward her. She didn't move, didn't smile, didn't cry. He stopped just close enough to share breath. And she asked, "Why didn't you ever ask me to stay?" His hat tilted low. He looked at the horizon where the sun was climbing, gentle and new. "Didn't want you to think I was another man asking you to give yourself up. I was waiting to see if you'd stay. For you." She closed her eyes, just for a heartbeat. And then she did something simple, something honest. She took both his hands in hers. Calloused fingers met weathered palms. Then she turned, walked to the crate, placed one hand upon it. He followed. Together, they lifted it, not as weight, but as choice, and carried it away from the station, away from the past, toward a home still unwritten, but finally theirs, asterisk, and so. Dear listener, if you ever find yourself waiting on a crate on a promise on a life that hasn't yet arrived, remember this. The ones who don't come don't define you. The ones who see you silently, gently, and without demand, they're worth noticing. And the love that stays quietly by your side after the dust is settled is worth more than any letter you were once promised. You are not abandoned. You are becoming. And somewhere, someone sees you just as you are and calls that beautiful.